We haven't had Dr. Raywat Deonandan on for a while. He's an epidemiologist and associate professor at the Faculty of Health Sciences, University of Ottawa, and he's also one of the funniest tweeters in the land. He takes a chance on humor, and I'm glad that he does. Many epidemiologists shy away from humor. They're creative people, and they've got a great sense of humor, but they don't believe that it belongs in the media, social media, conventional media. Dr. Deonandan is always loose. He's not loose with the facts, but he's always loose with his sense of humor. And his child sometimes gets involved in the broadcast, although my guess is it's a little after 11:30 right now in Ottawa. So my hope is that your toddler is asleep right now. Would that be correct, Dr. Deonandan?
I hope he is. I'm in the basement. I can't really hear him, and he was awake. Had a rough morning ahead of me.
Okay, because I think one time we had you on, we heard a little bit of him, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is what people have to go through when they're dealing with basically newborns. In the first few years, there is very, very little sleep. So, Dr. Deonandan, let me go right to the business of the AstraZeneca, and I'll tell you why. We're expecting 500,000 this week. As a matter of fact, we're expecting a plane load of AstraZeneca to come in from India tomorrow, and there is some controversy. I see study after study saying AstraZeneca is great for everyone, and then other studies, some of them are being taken quite seriously by Canadian authorities, suggesting that AstraZeneca is fine, but let's give them to people under 65. And there's always another hand. Well, wait a minute. The vaccines we're getting right now from India, as of tomorrow, they're going to be expiring relatively soon. If we wait until we're giving them to people under 65, they're going to be pretty useless, because I don't think we're administering vaccines to anyone under 65 anywhere in this country for the time being. So I just want to give you the platform here, Dr. Deonandan. Where do you come down on AstraZeneca, and whether or not we can distribute it to people older than 65 years of age?
Okay, well, it's a good vaccine, first of all. And here's the thing. It's a miracle we have any vaccines at all. Let's keep that in mind. And by some additional miracle, the first ones that were licensed were these incredible science fiction style vaccines, the mRNA ones, that gave us an unpredicted 94, 95% efficacy. So the fact that the AstraZeneca one is slightly less than that, 62, 70, depending upon which reports you read, is disappointing to some people. But in fact, that's a very high efficacy rating. So it's a good vaccine. Now, should it be used on people over 65? Here's the thing. The clinical trial had people over 65, but not very many of them. And so many people claim that it is inappropriate to use that small number to compute an efficacy score that we can then extrapolate to the general public. I don't know where I stand on that, except I do think it probably is fine for over 65s, because real-life data, especially out of Scotland, shows that it works well on that population, and it seems to keep the overwhelming majority, if not every recipient, out of the hospital. So that's the goal here, right? And we tend to lose sight of the goal when we talk about the nitty-gritty of which vaccine is better and how to use it. The goal here is to get society back to normal as quickly as possible. And is this an appropriate tool to help us do so? Absolutely. But it matters, of course, strategically how we use it and how quickly we use it. So I think it can be used on those over 65, but we probably don't need to deploy it that way, because we have the mRNA vaccine. So where I stand, given the supply issues and if we have enough of them, et cetera, I think it's most efficiently applied to the less vulnerable population. So people 18 to 39 or 40 or so, and reserve the mRNA vaccines for the more vulnerable people who are more likely to be in the hospital and more likely to die.
But if we're not giving, I'm not trying to be argumentative here. I'm just trying to get as much clarity as possible. If we're not giving them right now, not giving vaccines right now to people in that 18 to 49, 18 to 54 age group, then what is the point of having vaccines here? The AstraZeneca, which we're told is about a month or two away from expiry date.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. So I think they should be used, absolutely. They're best used on the slightly younger population. I say slightly, I mean literally slightly, in the early 40s, maybe even 50s. But Honestly, they're probably fine for people over 65. And I base this on the observations in England and Scotland, where judicious use of this vaccine has seen their case numbers drop substantially and their hospitalization numbers as well. So it all comes down to, do we expect additional doses of the mRNA vaccine sooner rather than later? If so, then we can start using AstraZeneca into the arms of, less vulnerable people. And if we don't expect the mRNA vaccines to come quickly, then we can use the AstraZeneca vaccines in people who are slightly more vulnerable. I think they'd be well used in frontline people like police, for example, who are otherwise young and fit, but have a high exposure probability. So for those people, gambling, for lack of a better word, with the slightly less efficacious vaccine is a good strategy to use.
So, Doctor, here's one thing that I'm always having to, this has nothing to do with AstraZeneca. This has to do with any of these vaccines. I have trouble with the skeptics, not because I want to be as optimistic as possible. One of the reasons I have problems with the skeptics is they never actually give me any evidence. I mean, if there was a study that said they have looked at thousands of people who have actually gotten the jab, because AstraZeneca's, yes, all of these are relatively new, but many, many thousands of people have already gotten it. If someone could say to me, okay, we've looked at a pool of 5,000 people who've gotten the AstraZeneca, and 5% of them, or 7% or 17% of them have gotten COVID, and therefore this is not as efficacious as Pfizer or Moderna. But that's never what we hear. Do you hear that?
Not really, no. Except that it is slightly true that the observed efficiency around effectiveness is slightly less than Pfizer and Moderna. But the proportion, the number of people who end up in the hospital or die after getting the vaccine is zero for all the vaccines. So that's the takeaway message here is all the vaccines that have been licensed by Health Canada will keep you out of the hospital and out of the morgue. And is that not what we want?
Well, and I'm not trying to disparage the fact that some people have side effects with certain vaccines, or some people may even get a light case of COVID. But for goodness sakes, if every single one of these vaccines is virtually guaranteed to keep us, to use your words, keep us out of the ICU or out of the morgue, aren't we being a bunch of, shall we say it, spoiled people for whining about efficacy? To me,
a little bit.
The most significant part of efficacy is to keep me alive.
I think we've lost track of what the goal is again, and I think all of this has been a challenge in contextualizing the crisis as one of population risk rather than individual risk. Even going back to the infection fatality rate, the probability of dying. So the probability of dying for this disease at the population level is like between 0.5 and 1%, which doesn't sound very high, and it isn't for an individual. So if you or I were to get this disease, you have a very low probability of dying. And for some people, that means it's not scary. But when this is scaled up to the population level, 0.5 or 1% of a million people is a large number. So the challenge to the population is quite severe. The same goes with the vaccines. We lost sight of the fact that this is a population endeavor. This isn't about protecting me perfectly. It's about protecting enough people adequately so that the crisis goes away. And when the crisis goes away, guess what? Everybody wins. So it's a win for the individual if the population wins. It's not necessarily a win for the population if just the individual wins.
Is it fair to say, and we've got 3 approved right now by Health Canada, and I guess Johnson & Johnson is in the on-deck circle, but right now it's Oxford/AstraZeneca, Moderna, Dolly Parton's vaccine, and Pfizer, Pfizer-BioNTech. Those are the 3. Is it fair to say right now, I just want to get something definitive if I can from the epidemiologist, is it fair to say, doctor, that as of now, regardless of which one you get, regardless of how old or young you are, if you get AstraZeneca, Pfizer-BioNTech, or Moderna, you will stay alive?
There is an exceedingly high probability that you will stay alive. I can't give you guarantees.
Thanks for listening to the Charles Adler Tonight podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, rate,